Welcome to the Semi-Retired Podcast with your hosts, Dave Farrant.
And me, Richard Bonomo.
Richard, would you like to introduce our special guest tonight?
This week we have Sam Piazza. Sam is a person of faith. Dave and I are
not.
And so we're going to have a discussion. It's not a confrontation. It's not a challenge. No one's going to try to convert anyone. It's three adults.
In fact, I suspect there will be no conversions tonight. Yeah, I think we're going in with 2-1. It's going to be 2-1 at the end of the night, and the same 2-1. And full disclosure, Sam and I know one another because he's a good friend of my eldest daughter. They went to high school together, and in fact, last summer we formed a trivia team and beat all the other teams by a hell of a mile on that particular. No, we did. We came in second. I can't do it. So we know one another. There's some background there, but we've agreed that we're not going to pull any punches tonight. Nobody's going to try and talk anybody out of their beliefs, but in order to get some value from the discussion, we're going to have to go at it. So with those ground rules out there on the table, Sam, do you want to get things going with a question for us? I think you wanted to get the ball rolling, maybe.
Sure.
And please feel free. Ask us anything. Except that. Sorry, I'm just kidding.
Well, I was going to propose if you'd like for me to introduce myself a bit and
my
background, and then we can get into it. So my name is Sam. I've been a Christian for almost my entire life. So I've been raised in a Christian household. Both my parents are Christians. There was a period of time during my adolescence that I stopped going to church, and I considered myself in that period to have technically left the church, but not completely. I was still attending church here or there, but if you were to ask me back then, I would say I wouldn't characterize myself as a Christian in those years.
For a period of years in the middle there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Sam, when you say Christian, are you talking Roman Catholic?
So when I say I'm a Christian, Christianity, the umbrella of Christianity, okay, I would put myself in the category of a non-denominational Christian, although if you were to press me, I would say I'm most aligned with like the Baptist denomination.
Okay.
Forgive me for asking, but I think I know this, but you will tell me. Is the Baptist denomination a subset of Protestantism?
Correct. I thought maybe it would be good the first thing to talk about is the default position one should take with respect to whether God exists or not, because there's a lot of different positions out there. Some people think that the default position is agnosticism, where, we don't have enough information to be able to proclaim on the position of whether God exists, or is it that we should be default atheists because we need to be convinced by evidence, or even some people think that it is reasonable to be a Christian from the outset because God, according to some philosophers, is a properly basic belief, which I can explain in a second. But anyways, I'll let you guys tell me your position and then...
Okay, so if the question is, what do I think the default position should be? I think the default position for a human being should be not expecting that there be an entity like a God in the world. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's an add-on, something. I look at my own case. I never, looking back, had any attraction to any sort of religious belief. I don't have a religious bone in my body. It wasn't taught out of me. It wasn't kept away from me growing up. I was aware that religion was there in the sense that my neighbors across the street, who I was friends with and played with, I knew were Catholics because they had told me. And I think the big impact there was they weren't around Sunday mornings to play. We had to wait for them to get back from church. And that I remember feeling a bit frustrated by that because Sunday morning you want to play, but Susie and Lloyd were off at church. My parents are both from Western England, nominally Protestant or Anglican, I guess, Church of England would be the case. But certainly my father growing up, I never heard him say a word about religion. My mother would have been kind of small town English, like to go to Sunday school. Probably if my father had been more that way inclined, we'd have gone to church from time to time. Neither of my parents ever talked to us about God or religion that I can recall. God was a concept that growing up was in the air. I came out of cartoons even. I'm not saying that to be belittling, but the imagery was there. The idea was there. I remember the movie Chariots of the Gods when I was like 9 years old, became a big deal. That was Eric Van Daniken suggesting that, there was evidence in ancient art of gods, in this case being aliens, but not the one God, not the God. I've gone maybe a bit off track, but I'll come back to home base to answer the question simply. I think the default position needs to be that there isn't a God. I don't believe there's a God or there were gods before when we believe there were multiple gods. And I don't see the value of that entity in this day and age in someone's life.
I'm a bit the same way. I think the default position is there is none. And I'm slightly different from Dave. I mean, I went to Catholic school, so we had all the default ceremonies confirmation, communion. And in our case, I love bringing this up, we had the mass confessionals where a few times a year you would go to an auditorium where priests would be sitting in chairs and we'd line up in rows to go confess. Not in a confessional, but in an actual, as if it was theater here. And we'd all be in line trading sins. You know, like, what are you going to say this week? I don't know what I'm going to say. We're like trying to collect sins like they were hockey cards.
What age is this?
Elementary school. So,
Okay.
Less than 13.
Right.
And it was like a thing, like we're trading sins, so we have something to say to the priest, because otherwise you can't go there and say, Father, I was pretty good this week, because that's not going to fly. It didn't fly.
You need
back
something,
then.
right?
Yeah. My parents were not religious. My mother they never really talked religion. The one time my dad talked religion, he told us, from now on, you're going to go to church on Sunday. And I said, why? He said, because you got to go to church on Sunday. I said, what are you going to do? So I'm going to stay home and read the paper. I said, if you're staying home to read the paper, I'm staying home to watch cartoons. And that was the end of the discussion. My father being Italian, it wasn't a big thing in our family. I don't remember my grandmother and grandfather going to church every Sunday. Maybe they did. I have no memory of it. It was never something that was discussed. We knew it existed. Like, I had a Bible when I was a kid because they gave you one in school, and I read the New Testament twice. And you had I don't know if you had that when you were a kid. They had the Bible, and in the back was all the days of the year, and it would give you like 4 lines to read every day. And if you went through the whole year, you'd go through the Bible in a year. That was the idea. You'd read 3 lines. So it's like, imagine trying to read a book by reading 3 lines. It was there. It was never really enforced on us. And it was enforced more in school than it was in the home. The whole street was mostly Italians. I'm guessing they went to Sunday school, to church on Sundays. No idea. I was in that church twice, I think, the one I was baptized in. That was about it. As I grew older, I don't see the need anymore. As a kid, I thought, okay, maybe this is useful, blah, blah, blah. You've got the Bible. This is what people do. There's a community around it. I understand the idea of the community of it, but I find it's a construct. And when you look at what's been done in the past, it's a construct to control the masses. And I understand there's lots of good that comes from it, in that for people who need help or are lonely or need a sense of community, it's there. I don't like the idea of having to worship a deity. One of the big things that bothers me is the word worship. The fact that we worship this sort of deity that we have to give our allegiance to. It's almost military and evil to me, in a sense, that if you don't, you're going to hell. That's the way it is. Well, if you're all forgiving, shouldn't we, when we get to the end, shouldn't we change our minds at the end and still get through the pearly gates? I mean, I don't understand that, right? Like, it doesn't make sense that you have to, like, bow down. You shall have no other gods before me, but you can't worship them, but you can worship me.
I remember thinking to myself as I was thinking about the episode, I love history. Talked about that. I think you do too, as a matter of fact, right? And it occurs to me that if Constantine, the Roman emperor, had not converted the empire to Christianity after he saw a burning cross in the sky as he was about to go into battle at the Milvian Bridge, and he felt that it was basically saying, by this shall ye conquer. I can imagine a Roman emperor of the 4th century having a vision like that. Had he not converted the empire from paganism to Christianity, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because Christianity at that point was a sect that was not well regarded by the general Roman population, which was pagan. They would have been seen as heretics, I guess, if you could even apply that word to them. And it might have died out. So when I look at Roman Catholicism now, the Roman Universal Church is what it means. What I see is a distant echo of Roman power, where you worship the emperor, because the emperor was, his power was so absolute and so concentrated. When I see the churches now, and the cathedrals and the basilicas and the hierarchy, the Pope and the cardinals and the priests and etc., I see a military organization, power structure based on the old Roman Empire. And in that way, it's intriguing, because it gives you a sense of how big that empire was and how powerful it must have been. The buildings and the splendor of it 1,700 years ago, not today. Anyways, I wanted to throw that in because I might not have got to.
That's good. And had we stayed pagans, there'd be a lot less goats.
So there would, in fact. To get back to school, all of us went to school in Montreal. So I was in the Protestant school system. We had not a peep of religion ever, except in grade 1, my teacher, Mrs. Oswald, who probably was told not to do this, would make us recite this little hymn as we were eating our lunch. It was, "Gentle Jesus, meek and good, let us thank him for our food." And we like, well, but it's food. And she said, well, no, it has to rhyme with good, so it's food. So we say, well, this is really delicious food, Mrs. Oswald. So that's probably as close as I got to religion in elementary school.
But just a question for you. Yeah. Did you guys have to pray like in the morning in school, like at the beginning of class?
No, so not at elementary school, not in high school. Although our high school, Collège Saint-Anne de la Chine, does have a religious foundation.
Sure it would, yeah.
So there's a large section of it that was used by the nuns.
Is it the Grey Sisters, maybe?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think so,
Saint-Anne.
eh? Yeah.
And there was a portion of the school that was dedicated to the nuns' use, and it was still being used when we were at school. And then recently they transformed it all, they renovated, and are now using it for the new CEGEP.
So did you have nuns as teachers?
No, we didn't.
No,
But-
we had
okay.
a couple, yeah.
But no, we weren't asked to pray or anything like that.
Elementary school, we did every morning, like before class started, we all stood up and we said a prayer. Or some places they recite the national anthem, or whatever. In our case, it was a prayer, but not in high school. High school, that was none of that.
Well, that's the other thing. I didn't even know, maybe jumping ahead a bit, but even in high school, I had no idea what religion any of my friends were. And I didn't even know if I had any, I don't think I knew that Jewish people existed. As ignorant as that may sound, I didn't know none of the guys that I knew, I'll say mostly the guys, identified themselves as Jewish. And it was only in my mid-20s when I had a couple of my closest friends were Jewish guys. And I think they asked me, did you have any Jewish friends in high school? I was thinking, if I did, I have no idea. And in retrospect, I think there were some Jewish guys in there when I think back in their names, but no one ever said a peep, not a word. So I got through to CEGEP with zero direct exposure to religion beyond movies, TV. The Exorcist was a big deal. In 1973, that movie came out. I read the book. I'd started buying adult novels at that point. I was 12 years old, but I would buy the novels, not that kind of adult novel, Richard. Not the stuff you have. I'm talking about Serpico and Jaws and that sort of thing. Okay. And reading that, a book that's steeped in religious ceremony, that would have been my exposure to religion.
Okay.
Up to maybe 15, 16, 17, 18 years old.
We had religion class in high school, in elementary school, obviously, but in high school we did have a religion class that we had to attend, yeah.
An interesting point that I think a lot of people miss is how related the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are. Because as Christians, I believe that it is the same God. And I know that the general perspective is that the God in the Old Testament is violent, vindictive, and he's also just straight out genocidal.
Willful, certainly.
Contrasting that with Jesus in the Old Testament, who's a loving God who preaches peace and turning the other cheek, pacifism, all these things. And I think that the gods that are presented in the Old Testament are not different, and actually are complementary, because in one case you have the justice of God, let's say, that is being emphasized in one, and then you have the love in the other. And they're kind of, I would say, two sides of the same coin, because a God that is fully loving also needs to be fully just. And you can say the same thing in the opposite way. For example, if God is loving, he truly loves us, then he would not overlook wrongdoings. And so that is just one example of love requires justice. There's much more that can be said about that, but I'll let you guys comment.
I feel like we have to throw the ball back to you a little bit here, because you started off with the question, what's our default position? And Richard and I both said our default position is that we don't need a God, don't believe in God, but you're on the other side of the coin. So how does that start for you? Why do you need a God? Because I don't understand why that is. I accept that it exists. I respect it in a sense of difference, but I don't get it.
That's a great question. I think there's different ways that I can go about answering that. I think the first way is that I think we need God because we were created by God. And so as a result of being created in God's image, there's certain things that point to our need for a creator. I can give you examples of that.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I maybe have to rephrase my question, which is, why do you believe that we were created by a God as opposed to by nature? Collections of protons and electrons and 6 elements or so, a lot of oxygen. Maybe I'm being literal here, but an entity of some description that, in my way of thinking, needs to be made of the same matter, because we know that's all there is. Science has told us there isn't anything else. Well, there's energy, but matter and energy are interchangeable. They're the same thing. So why a need for a God to have created us as opposed to we emerged from nature?
I would push back a bit on what you just said about nature's all there is, because I think that's one position to take. There are other positions to take. And I think there is good reason to believe that that's not the full picture of reality. And one of the reasons why I think that is because if you take, let's say, the nature of the universe, right? So if you agree with this, that there was a Big Bang event and that space and time literally began at point zero, right? And there was no space and time before that. We can't even speak of the time before because there was no before. In that sense, if you go back and think of, okay, well, the universe came into existence at a certain point, and the universe itself could not have given rise to itself.
I don't know. I literally don't know. Apparently it did. It seems to have done so.
And to me, that's just as credible as the fact that a god and some entity created the universe. The position is as credible or as incredible for either position. For someone who believes in science and the Big Bang, for them to say, no, there's someone orchestrated that. Doesn't make sense. There's no proof of that. And on the other side, you'd say the opposite. So to me, I think either position stands, depending which way you're looking at it.
Both positions stand. Why do you choose that position? Because I know I've chosen the Big Bang, space-time, 92 elements, galaxies, star clusters, all that. All beautiful to me stuff. You've chosen the other. So why the other?
I just don't understand how something can come from nothing with no explanation. So basically we're saying, I think the logical conclusion that we must take in this case is that for some reason we have no idea, or through some mechanism.
We thought the sun revolved around the earth 500 years ago.
That's true.
So we're getting there, working our way, clawing our way. Not me personally. I've had nothing to do with it.
But yeah, so I think that the conclusion to take is that there is an event that happened with absolutely no explanation through some, for me, it's unexplainable how there was the original, I guess, quantum fluctuations, whatever you want to call it, that generated the spark that led to X and Y and all these different things that led to that. And so for me, it just follows logically that because all things must have a cause, right? If we think about in general, like the law of causality, that everything has a cause of its existence, then you have to include the universe in that. If the universe exists, it also must have a cause. And that cause, by nature, cannot be time-bound. It cannot be like in time. It cannot be in space. It cannot be made of material. It cannot be physical. So
why can't it be those things?
Because when the universe began to exist, those things began to exist. So space, time, matter, prior to those things, the thing or entity or whatever you want to call it that brought about this in actuality cannot be those things. It cannot be equivalent to those things.
And for you, it's an entity. I have to say, for you, it's an entity. An entity to me is a being of some sort that has an independent existence.
This is actually an interesting point by itself, but I would say that this being is actually a mind. And there are other reasons why I believe that. The qualities that we can use to describe it are very limited because we don't know much.
Keep looking deeper and deeper into space, but yeah, can't see it yet.
So the qualities that we can ascribe to it are what I said before, which is we know that it is spaceless, timeless, immaterial. If this thing brought into being the universe, it must be unimaginably powerful.
And why does it have to be an it? Why couldn't the universe just have come into existence as a matter of natural
But there is no
events?
Nature, right? There's no nature before. There has to be something outside of
that's semantics,
nature.
though. If there was nothing before the Big Bang, then there was nothing.
Nothing.
We can't even imagine it because we can't get back and look at it. And then it came into existence. That's a big sentence. I know it came into existence and blew up.
Mm-hmm.
And all this singularity
Yes.
blew up into space and began expanding. And it's all gas at that point. There's nothing else. I don't see an entity in there. I can't imagine the role of an entity in there or the point of an entity in that picture. I can imagine, to the best I'm able to, that this matter blew off into space and it's all just a sea of quarks at this point that haven't even glued themselves into protons yet. And slowly this all starts to coagulate. I can believe that, even if I can't answer all the questions about it. I'm like, okay, because I can see the evidence of it all around me. I can look at the sun burning and I'm told, I don't know, I haven't been there, that it's a big ball of hydrogen and that it's burning under its own gravity. All sort of makes sense. And it's quite lovely, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see where there's an entity in there.
So
I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to get at that point. Why an entity?
So when I use the term entity, it might be misleading. I'm not suggesting that there was, let's say, a personal being as would be described as a god.
Okay.
I'm just using, because it's hard to use a term to describe
something. Yes, it is. No, it is actually. I can see that. It's hard to talk about stuff.
Something.
Yeah, something.
Something. We don't know. It's hard to describe. But I would just say that thing, whatever it is, or for lack of a better term, is those qualities by nature of what I just mentioned before, it being antecedent to space, time, matter.
Okay, so for you, there's something before that.
Before, logically, not in time.
Before, okay, not in time because
Logically
time
prior.
didn't exist yet, because
exactly.
space-time are two sides of the same coin.
Exactly,
Anyways, as
exactly.
Einstein pointed out, I mean, we almost don't have the language to describe it. Let's not cop out, though.
Yes.
Let's keep
Yes.
at it, even
Yes.
though we lack the language to describe it.
Yes.
So for you, there's something there, not just the sheer, just the fact that it happened.
Yes, correct.
And that something is God.
Yes.
Okay.
I always have the question of God as is often portrayed as a being, an entity, a deity, whatever. How is that different from the idea or the concept of God as a concept, as a force without having? Because when we say deity, we've humanized it in a sense. We've given it a big beard, hair, screams down. It's got arms. It hurls lightning bolts at us. How do you see that? I know you said you see it as a sort of a mind, but do you see like God as more entity-ish, as a singular thing, or as an idea or a concept or a force that is not necessarily a bearded guy up there?
Yeah.
And that sounded a little off there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's fine. So I believe that God is a personal being. I wouldn't say that characterizing God as a force would be accurate, although God definitely has power.
Well, you brought the universe into existence, right?
Yes, exactly. And
power.
God is, yes, and he is the sustainer of all things, according to Christianity. But then there's also the notion of God is both transcendent, so apart from his creation, but also immanent, so in the creation, which is something that I think is quite unique compared to other world religions. But for that point, I would say that, so God, yes, is a mind, the ultimate consciousness that brought everything into being. But he also inserted himself into reality in the form of Jesus Christ. So he is a deeply personal being that cares a lot about what we are doing in this life. He's not just this force that created us and says, good luck, guys. It's your life. I hope you make the best of it. I don't think that that's what God's intentions are in creating us.
Would it be the case then, if he inserted himself into, would he have done that for all the other civilizations no doubt exist in the universe? In all the 6 to 20 trillion galaxies, 100 billion stars each, planets everywhere. We know there's other civilizations out there. Would he have done this for all of them or just us?
He could have. Maybe there's life in other places. Maybe.
You're not sure?
I'm not sure, no.
Really, eh?
You're not sure? You don't think there could be? This is one of the things we wanted to discuss. You have the point of view that there is a God who's created the universe. Yes. Dave and I are of the opinion that we're not alone. Mm-hmm. It seems mathematically impossible if you look at the number of other stars and planets and galaxies there are. It seems it would be absolutely impossible for us to be alone. The position then is...
We might be.
Yeah, we might be. I don't see any conflict with Christianity on that.
So he created all that, 6 to 20 trillion galaxies, each composed of 100 billion stars. And in this one little planet, it was all for this? Seems like a lot.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of extra resources for nothing.
Yeah, a lot of wastage there. Sorry, I'm just saying.
The notion of wastage is quite interesting, because I think if God creates all things by his word, right? He speaks and things come into existence. Is anything truly wasteful? Like, I'm hesitant to understand that.
We know what our sun is, because without it, we're done. Mm-hmm. This conversation's over. 8 minutes, we're all that's it. We're fried. So there's one blob of hydrogen burning. There's 100 billion of those blobs in our galaxy, and 6 to 20 trillion galaxies like that we can see. There's more than that. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of stuff out there, stretching billions of light years distance-wise. And it's been around for like 13.8 billion years, all for us? 7 billion humans? I'm sounding facetious, and I don't mean to. Yeah. I want to take that back.
Get it. We're basically a speck of dust in the universe, but to have created all that extra space just for us, could there then be another 100 million civilizations all following the same God? Is that something that you can wrap your head around? Does that make sense to you?
Sure. Yeah. I don't see any conflict there. And if there are, then I would think that they would also have the same, well, if they exist, then they would also be created in the image of God. So they would also have the same sort of making or designing that they would need a creator or be operating in the same way that we do, in the sense that we are religious beings in need of
Well, some of us are.
have the religious instinct is what I'm
So
trying to say.
if there were 100 million other us's, that's the plural of us, right?
Aside.
What's the chance that from their creation, if it was all created at the same time, they're another speck floating there, then they grew up from being, crawl out of the ocean and eventually become a human. What's the chance that they have the same vision of God as we do? Why would he do this on that scale of 100 million times all over to have exactly the same thing everywhere? It seems a bit repetitive.
I haven't really thought about that question, to be honest.
I like it. I hadn't thought of it either.
If God is the author of reality, I don't think it would be a problem for him to reveal himself in such a way that the people, regardless of how they were created or the differences between us and them, I think it'd be easy for him to reveal himself in such a way that they would understand him. And I think that if we look throughout human history, I think that God has clearly revealed himself to everybody in such a way that can be understood, which is, I know it might be controversial to some, but I think that most people, we can see this through different civilizations, have had some sort of belief in a higher power.
That seems to be common, yeah.
You might object that maybe what if the figure of Jesus Christ was never presented to that civilization? Maybe they didn't have the access to the same information that we did.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
But I think that God can still reveal himself in a way that would be understandable to those people.
I always thought in that case he might have done it in a way that was a bit more universal rather than just showing up in what we now call the Middle East and revealing himself to some tribes there. Mm-hmm. What about the poor people of northern Japan, who would be equally deserving of knowing of their creator's existence? Why would he not reveal himself universally and say, okay, peeps, I'm here, everybody, Eskimos, Indians, everybody. But he chose not to. Why pick on the Jews?
I actually do believe that God has revealed himself universally.
Okay.
So there are two different types of revelation. There is general revelation and special revelation. So general revelation refers to the revelation that is available to all people, and that can be clearly perceived. So for example, the fact that there is beauty in nature, for example, that it is awe-inspiring, that it is majestic, that it is
in full agreement there,
amazing, beautiful, so on and so forth. The fact that we know inside ourselves that there's a right and wrong. Mm-hmm. The fact that...
Just to be clear at this point, I don't ascribe that knowledge of right and wrong to any religious impulse. I think that's inherent in human beings.
That's an interesting point. How would you...
I don't feel that I needed to be told that by a superior being. I think that, generally speaking, I think people can understand right from wrong. I think your parents teach you certain things and say, hey, don't steal little Johnny's sandwich and don't punch the kid across the road in the head. Mm-hmm. I've never had an impulse in my life to steal or kill anybody. I just don't have it. I'm the least religious person you'll meet. I just kind of understand intuitively it's a bad idea to take someone's life. Mm-hmm. Bad idea to break into the guy's house next door and take his wine because I'm thirsty.
And you would think when man first came on Earth, 3 million years or whatever, until we find the next fossil, years ago, Ugg, the first caveman who came out of a cave because he's a caveman, would have come out, and those people would have known right from wrong without having met God. Because if we go by what we've read, it's like 6,000 years ago, he decided, hey, by the way, I'm here. The first people would have probably worshipped the sun because it came up every time. And is that what ended up saying, you shall have no other God before me? Because now people have strayed from the fact, but people were good and bad before God came around. And I don't think God had to come around to give them the concept of being good or bad. How were those people able to survive without the concept? That's where I have the issue with, where the concept came out as a way of controlling the masses. As a way of, we'll put this out as a way of saying, this is what you have to do. You have to come to church every Sunday. You pay us. Oh, by the way, you're going to help build the church that you're going to come to and pay us for.
And by the way, we do it now with civil and criminal law. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't sign a contract and break it. Don't drive your car faster than 60 miles an hour. We're going to give you a ticket. So we need laws. Mm-hmm. And I think those laws were good for the time. Don't kill. Don't covet your neighbor's oxen or whatever. I mean, that's all good stuff. It was like that. It made sense for that kind of fairly primitive agrarian society. And now we've got a ton of laws. I can't run around naked in the street. I don't want to, but if I wanted to, I can't really do that because they're going to throw me in jail. Mm-hmm. And I have no impulse to do it anyways. I didn't need a God. I don't need a God for that.
I agree with you. I agree with both of you. Yeah, we don't need a God to know what's right and wrong, but that is exactly what Christianity preaches, right? Because like I was saying before, if we're created in God's image, he's he's written, and the Bible says this actually, he's written his law in our hearts, which means that every person has a God-given conscience. So by nature, independent of someone reading the Bible or being preached to, we all have a sense that there is a right and wrong thing to do.
You said a God-given conscience.
Yes.
I don't ascribe that it's a God-given conscience. I describe it's a conscience. And it's,
So then I would ask
this
you,
is the way I was brought up, to know right from wrong. And I didn't need to be given a conscience that was empty until it was filled by God.
are you saying that
It seems convenient to take it after the fact. We were around for 3 million years. We knew right from wrong. We come in, we write some new laws. Hey, by the way, that thing that told you right from wrong, oh yeah, that was my idea. I'm the originator. I'm the OG.
I'm one of these people who finds it very easy to feel guilty for something I've done. Mm-hmm. It's probably a bit of a hampering factor in my life. I probably should have been a bit more, a bit more thoughtless. But I can think, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. I feel badly about this and this and that. Probably why I never became a big business tycoon, because I don't have that in me to do that. I'm too worried about the other guy. And then I don't have a religious bone in my body.
I think that's just the image of God working through you. I mean, that's
oh, Sam.
That's just
Oh my God. Yeah.
that's just. I'm sorry. That's
nice of you to say.
No, I agree with you guys. We don't need a God to tell us what is right and wrong. We know it instinctively because God has given us this conscience. So I just wanted to spend a bit of time to probe you guys a bit on what we were just talking about. So what do you think morality is at its base, and where does it come from?
For me, morality is a general sense of how to treat and how not to treat your fellow human beings.
Okay.
A code of conduct.
A code of conduct, you could call it. Where does it come from? I believe it's inherent in human beings as social animals. We like to group together and gather together. And I imagine over the millennia, as we develop, as we emerge from our caves and our brains developed, certain behaviors were seen to be more beneficial. Like it was better not to beat your neighbor across the head with a club and take his food, better that you went out and hunted for food together. Mm-hmm. And so it developed like a physical characteristic like dark hair. There's always going to be, in any group of people, there's going to be amoral or immoral people. It's just the law of averages. But if you took 100 people and threw a net over them, I would say that you're going to get, I'll do the 80-20 rule. You're going to get 80 who have a generally good sense of how to get along together because it's collectively beneficial. You're going to get 10 who are sort of somewhere up there. Sometimes they're on board, sometimes they're not. And you're going to get 5 who are sort of, and then the last 5 are going to be sociopaths. Mm-hmm. They're going to club you over the head and take your bone, and they're going to steal your woman, and they're going to, whatever. And that's kind of the way it is. Mm-hmm. And so we draft laws for those people. Like, I don't break the speed limit. Law wasn't drafted for me. Mm-hmm. I know there's people out there who need that law, man, because they drive like idiots. I see them every day. Do you break the speed limit?
Sometimes.
Stop the podcast.
Never egregiously.
No, I mean a little, but I mean, you're not driving down through like 150 kilometers an hour inbound. No. So that's my point. Yeah. But we have laws for those people. But most people, like, again, I don't need to be told that. I know whatever. So that's my concept of morality. That's what I think morality is. Mm-hmm. A general sense of treating people decently, not screwing them over, not hurting them. I think that's inherent. We've learned that through millennia of development of social animals.
I agree. And the fact that Ugg and his fellow cavemen were able to behave that way before the presence, as far as we know, of God or gods goes to prove to me that the morality is not something that God instilled in Ugg the caveman, because Ugg and his fellow cavemen had it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they wouldn't be around. They would have all clubbed themselves to death and we wouldn't be around anymore.
At the same time, it's possible to, how can I say this, train it out of people. To use an overused example, we look at what happened in Germany in the 1930s, where you had a government, like a small ruling clique, really, that was able to amoralize and immoralize enough of the population to cause them to do things they wouldn't normally do. At least turn a blind eye, if not actively participate in a horrible world war and a genocide. These are deeply Christian people, by the way. The Catholic South, the Protestant North, as deep and as rich a Christian heritage as any country in Europe. And within 10 years, by dint of skillful propaganda, a dangerous, if you will, reaction to economic circumstances in the 1920s, they turned that population temporarily, enough of them, not all of them, but enough of them, into people who could behave very, very badly, and the rest kind of went along with it. because they saw it to their benefit. So they were amoralized or immoralized by a small group of people at the top.
The rest of the world saw it as being wrong and fought against it, right?
Fought against it. That's right. We have to beat these people back into their cities. And immediately, of course, forgave them because it wasn't their fault. It was the fault of their leadership. But we made peace with the German people and helped reconstruct their country. And they're our friends now because we're not that way inclined. But that leadership did it to them.
Just to summarize what you guys are saying, so you're saying that morality is a code of conduct that we have evolved from millennia.
It's an inherent human trait, like breathing.
But it can't be inherent if it developed over time, right?
I think Ugg, the first guy came out, he had it. I don't think his first instinct was to see Uggette and Clubber. Pretty sure that's not, otherwise we wouldn't be here. I don't think they started off all evil and slowly became good because we wouldn't have survived as a species.
The alpha male could have, killed all the non-alphas and through that reproduced and was very successful.
Possibly, but the good conduct ended up winning in the end, right? Otherwise, we'd be following one leader. Wow, that sounds familiar.
It's like language we didn't used to be able to speak. Now we can speak.
If I concede your point that it is from evolution, then what is the overall reason as to why we should follow that code of conduct that's developed? If it's evolved over time, what is it about that code that there's an inherent obligation in us that we need to follow it?
I'm not sure it's an obligation as much as I think it's a recognition that by generally being moral most of the time, we're more successful as a species. I think everybody wants a reasonably peaceful life. I like this life. I don't want to be living in a shelter. I don't want to be out hunting for food like they used to, like killing rabbits and skinning them. This is good. And so we get to this point and collectively we recognize that we've built something here that's a little bit better than it was, say, 50 years or 100 years ago. We move a little bit forward. And the collective sense of not fighting with our neighbors, mind you, it happens all the time. Doesn't matter who. I mean, you name the conflict. I mean, look what's happening in Europe right now. There we go again, down the same rabbit hole in the Ukraine. Can't seem to keep our guns in our pants. Why do we do it? Because I think we collectively realize it's better for us to be, generally speaking, what we call moral most of the time. And there's exceptions.
At the same time, I mean, if we treat people well, they'll treat us well, which is a line appropriated.
Enlightened self-interest, yeah.
Well, it's a line appropriated later on. Do unto others as you want done unto you. We got more cooperation and evolved more as a society when everybody was nice to each other and helped each other out. Eventually gathering grain, whatever it was, that wouldn't have happened if we all had self-interest and only followed our self-interests.
I think that's true, but I also think that there's no, even if that were the case and everyone was agreeing on that point, there is no inherent reason why we should follow it. Or why is it that, even if there was an agreement across the whole board of what leads to the well-being of all human species, why is it that me being this person, should follow your recommendation to follow this advice? Why shouldn't I just do whatever that leads to my personal well-being as opposed to others?
I'm sure there's enough people who do that. I mean, that's generally referred to as sociopathy, as people who operate in their own self-interest without any regard to what their effect on society around them. And there's enough people who will do that. If I was to suddenly start behaving in this apartment like a complete narcissist, or I don't know what to call myself, sort of thing. I played loud music all hours of the night. I left the doors open so the building got damaged and all that, because it would just be like, eventually that would come back and hit me. Okay, the owners of the building would be unhappy, my neighbors would be unhappy, and eventually I would pay a price for that because I would be behaving in a way that was not conducive to the general peace and tranquility of the area. And why would I do that? I might get some short-term satisfaction out of it if I was that, and I'm not that kind of person, but in the end, it's not going to do me any good. And I don't want my neighbors doing it either, by the way.
Society couldn't function if everybody decided to be that way, right? So The fact that one guy can be an asshole and do whatever he wants, it's simply because the rest of society, or the majority of it, has come together to make society work. And so it allows for the outliers to be whatever they are. You have the extreme good people, Mother Teresa, who went out and devoted an entire life doing things that most people would never even think
Who,
of.
according to Christopher Hitchens, was a complete fraud, by the way. That's another topic. You've heard about that, eh? Hitchens is one of my heroes.
I'm just saying, this is what is portrayed as being the extreme good. And then we have other characters are the extreme bad, but the majority of people help carry society forward so that we're not all extreme goods or extreme bads, the 80-20 rule.
So you guys mentioned the notion of progress or going forward. So how do you measure moral progress?
How do you measure moral progress? Let's see. I have to say there's probably a ceiling on morality. Like, I'm not sure there's an infinite progression of morality. If at the end of your life, you can look back and say, I generally treated people with respect. I generally tried to see the point of view of other people throughout the course of my life. I didn't do things that were specifically harmful to people. Maybe something I did inadvertently caused disadvantage to somebody, but I didn't steal somebody else's job. I didn't go into my boss's office and say, you should fire Bobby because he's an asshole. I want his job. I didn't do that. Is there an infinite limit to morality? No, I don't think you can get beyond a certain point. How much more moral can you be? I don't know.
I think what I'm trying to get to is, like, I feel that there's a lot of people who have different definitions of what is moral.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like, you might have a lot of people that agree on the general definition of, like, well, that something is moral insofar as it promotes human flourishing, or someone might say that morality is whatever is in accordance with, you know, the universal, what's the Kantian imperative, that you're supposed to act in such a way as to will the good of. I have to look that up again, but I think we can look that one up.
Yeah, I can only give you mine. I give you my definition. I mean, I don't know what everybody else's is, but that's mine.
I think it's you have to act in such a way that you willed that what you do is a universal maxim. I think that's what it is. But
do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think that's pretty good. I don't know where that came from. Is that biblical? And I have no idea.
I'm the originator.
It's you?
Of that.
Okay,
No.
fine. Okay. But that's pretty good.
yeah, so I'm basically like, the only thing I'm a bit, I guess, curious about here is, would you agree that over time societies have had different definitions of what is good or what is...
I'm sure that if I went back to pagan Rome, for instance, we might not agree on a lot of stuff in terms of what was good and not good. I mean, there's probably some general broad agreement, but I bet there's stuff that they thought was great that I would think was not, and vice versa.
All societies, I think, have that post or that line that says this is good and this is bad. Once you do this, you cross this line, you've gone bad. Sometimes I think that we have an inbuilt morality that tells us what's right, what's wrong. And then there are imposed moralities that are given to us by, it could be work. You can't take staples from work. Oh, take a staple. You know, we're going to go bankrupt. I understand it leads, staples is the what do they call it? The gateway drug. After staples, you start taking toner.
Not toner.
Workplaces will give you a sense of morality, their own guidelines as to what's right's wrong. Yet religion will do the same thing too. In certain religions, certain things are a lot more wrong than in other religions. And so there's many moralities. I think we have our inbuilt morality, and then we have what I would call the artificial moralities that were made by man to decide that this is how we want to control you, how we want to decide where we can guide you.
I think that's very true. I think innate and imposed moralities is true. I mean, laws are imposed moralities. I guess you could look at it that way. God knows we're awash in laws because people have a tendency to try and screw one another. So we have all kinds of laws to prevent that from happening.
So yeah, I'm trying to see where I can lead this point to. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we agree that what is deemed right and wrong can change over time,
I think local circumstances can affect the details, but I think the heart of it, not killing your neighbor, not stealing from your neighbor.
I'll say I'm going to contradict you there. In times of war, not stealing, when your family is starving, there's nothing left to do, the place has been abandoned, you break into a grocery store to feed your family.
Extreme circumstances,
exactly.
right? Extreme circumstances,
I think we need to be adaptable for certain things. I think killing is always going to be...
Yes.
I think that's like probably the top of the line, right? I mean, that's the line you shouldn't cross. Your family is being attacked. Okay, then there's,
that's self-defense. That's something else again.
Self-defense. Again, you're going to feel the guilt of killing someone, right? And again, the line in the Bible is not thou shalt not kill, it's thou shalt not murder, right? Which a lot of people don't realize. And there's a difference between killing and murdering. If you have to kill for self-defense to preserve, that's one thing. But
or if you're being paid by your government to kill as a soldier, that's true.
That is a line that is, there's a morality, an enforced morality by your government that says it's okay to kill
the other guys. Not us, those guys.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think, though, that above all of the laws and our understanding of those laws, because as you guys were saying, our understanding of morality changes and grows over time, progresses, that there are certain things that, independent of our own understanding of morality, are always wrong regardless of that. So, for example, I would say that it is always wrong and has always been wrong to torture babies for fun. Like that's just an extreme example. But
I can sign on to that.
I'll sign on too. Sorry. I didn't want to hesitate as if I was okay with that.
Thinking about it over there? Yeah.
What I'm trying to get at is that I think there are certain things, like what I just mentioned and others, that are morally wrong always at all times, independent of human opinion. They go above human opinion. And so we would consider these things as what we call objective moral rules, as opposed to subjective. Dependent on human opinion, they are independent of human opinion.
But it's the humans who can express or not express the morality. So how can there be something that's above human opinion? If it's us, we're the ones who are capable of being immoral, amoral, or moral. So it's always about us. Dogs aren't moral or immoral or amoral.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not understanding.
So I think you said there was a morality above humans, I think you said, or maybe I misunderstood you?
I'm saying that morality in itself is a thing that it is not something, it cannot be something if we consider that there are certain rules that are always wrong in all circumstances, independent of human opinion. That means that these rules are beyond the human realm. There are...
that's where I got caught. Because,
why are they independent of human opinion?
Because they would be wrong even, like, let's say if every single person on planet Earth right now believed that torturing babies for fun was correct, would you say that it is correct?
But nobody does. We have determined that is not right. We didn't need a God to tell us that. We know that it's wrong.
I'm saying, like, we're doing a thought experiment here.
Okay.
Like, in theory, if everyone, all the leaders and convince all the people, and all the people were in agreement that doing this was right, would it be right?
No.
So we're saying here that there are certain laws that are independent of what all the people believe, what the majority believes or everybody, are true regardless. So those, let's just say, objective moral laws, that's what I want to call them, because they are by definition not subjective. These, for me, when I think of morality, I think of these things that we need to explain. It's almost as if this is true, the universe in itself is moral in a sense, because there are these rules that are, I know this might sound a bit weird, but the rules are sort of woven into the fabric of the universe in a sense, because they are there independent of whether any humans would exist or not. Right.
But how would we know that? Because we've all decided that torturing babies is good. That's the thought experiment. If we say that's good, that's good. How are we going to know that there's something that tells us it's wrong?
But that's what I'm saying. Like you, for example, you would say that that's not right. So I would say that if God exists, that statement would always be true, because those rules would be, like I said, embedded into like the nature of the universe, let's say.
Well, see, I would look at it this way. I just to use your example, I know it's a provocative example, the babies. On any planet, anywhere in the universe, here, Andromeda Galaxy, whatever, where a species evolved to the point where cooperation and communal effort became something that it could perceive was to its advantage. Okay? So not like a pack of wild dogs, where if the food supply gets short, they'll eat the babies or whatever. And we know that in nature, they need food, they don't think. But in a society, a group of people or another species like us in some way that was becoming more intelligent, becoming more able to perceive that the fruits of its collective labor was a benefit, I think it would quickly realize, and maybe I'm making your point for you in a different way, that torturing its own babies wasn't in the collective interest. It upset the mothers, it upset the fathers, it caused the tribe not to grow as quickly as it might otherwise do. And yet, I can imagine at a certain level, somewhere along that continuum, if that tribe ran out of food, it would eat its own young, because it would have to survive. Mm-hmm. And then maybe a little further along, there'd be a cutoff point. People resort to cannibalism. Modern people have done famously, even in the last couple of centuries. You get people stuck in a snowy mountain pass and they resort to cannibalism, because it's that or die. Even though eating fellow human beings, generally speaking, not considered in very bad taste.
Yes.
Pun intended.
Pun intended, exactly. So I don't know if that gets at what you're getting at. And that's the end of part 1. Next Tuesday, part 2 drops on Semi-Retired. You won't want to miss it.